Hey y'all, today we are going to talk about how to pee and how to know if you're peeing correctly. Before we jump into it, if this is a topic that you're like, I've actually always wondered this, and all the other pelvic health information out there that no one else is talking about, if you want to know when new content comes out, make sure you go to the link that's in our description. It is the link to sign up for the Conquer Insiders newsletter. So you'll always know all of what we are posting about to make sure that everybody has access to the women's health and pelvic health information that you need. So let's talk about why I picked this topic. Okay, I recently got back from my wedding and bachelorette party in Cabo. While we were in Cabo with just the girls for the bachelorette days, we were floating in the ocean as one does at the beach, and the topic of peeing in the ocean came up. One of the girls that was on the trip said, I always heard that it might be bad for your bladder or your pelvic floor to pee in the ocean or in the pool, so I never have. And then they all looked at me and said, well, do you pee in the ocean? And I said, yes, I do. It's not bad for your bladder, it's not bad for your pelvic floor, but why do you think that? And she said, well, I have to push so hard, like way harder than I have to on the toilet to get myself to pee when I'm in the ocean or in the pool. And I was like, full stop. Do you push to pee? Like every time you pee, you push? And she was like, yeah, is that not right? So, spoiler alert, no, that's not right. And we're going to talk about that. But what it made me realize is nobody is teaching us these things, right? Like when we were getting potty trained as kids, our moms weren't sitting there telling us how to pee because they probably didn't know how to voice that or explain it. And so they were just telling us to pee. They were sitting us on our little training potty and telling us to pee, but no one was telling us how to do that. And I work with a lot of women who come to me for pelvic floor dysfunction, and we can really link that pelvic floor dysfunction and those problems they're having back to how they were peeing their entire lives because they were never told that it was wrong. Nobody is sitting with their group of friends saying, hey, how do you pee? Do you think that's normal? Because that's not how I pee, right? Like nobody's talking about that. So even if you have been doing it wrong your whole life, you have no idea. You have no idea that the rest of your friends and family aren't sitting on the toilet and pushing and forcing their bladder to empty. So we're going to jump into it. We're going to talk about how you actually pee correctly, how to know that you're peeing correctly, and if you're not, what to do about it. So let's jump into it. Okay. The first thing that we have to talk about is how your bladder and your pelvic floor function when you are actually sitting on the toilet and emptying your bladder. So I've got my handy pelvis here. I want you to remember that your bladder is an organ that sits in these pelvic muscles. So see how the pelvic floor makes like a hammock or a bowl of muscles? Your bladder is one of several organs that sits in that hammock of muscles at the very, very front. Your bladder, you should also know, has a muscle to it. So even though it is a sac that is collecting urine throughout the day, it should be progressively collecting urine. As it stretches, we should not really know that it's filling until it stretches to a certain amount and then sends our brain that notification of, hey, it's probably going to be time to empty soon. So that's filling, and now it's time for us to sit on the toilet to empty. What are we supposed to do? Well, if you think about opposing forces here, so the bladder that is sitting right here, I don't know why I didn't grab my actual bladder that goes with this model, but here we are. If you think about the bladder that sits right here and it has a muscle that's on top of it, we have that muscle that's on top and we have the muscles that are below that are surrounding your urethra. See, can you see that? That are surrounding your, there's your urethra, that are surrounding your urethra, keeping everything close so that your bladder doesn't empty when you don't want it to. But then we need a complete reversal of what the muscles are doing. So when you sit down, that muscle of your bladder should automatically squeeze by itself. And so that is reversing the pressures. And then if we are letting our pelvic floor go, which is what we are actually in control of, we're not in control of that bladder muscle, but we are in control of part of those pelvic floor muscles, the one that we squeeze really tight to make sure we don't pee our pants. We are in control of when we squeeze those and when we let those go. So what we're actually in control of is releasing these pelvic floor muscles in here, so that as that muscle on the top of the bladder squeezes, we have more pressure coming from the top than there is from the bottom, and therefore the urine is going to empty out of the bladder and out into the toilet. What that actually looks like when you sit down on the toilet should actually be nothing. So if you think about it, peeing and empty your bladder should be effortless. It shouldn't be something that you feel like you're having to make happen. It should be something that you're deciding to let happen, right? We're not letting our bladder empty in our day-to-day life while we're exercising, while we're running, while we're coughing, while we're sneezing and laughing, right? The whole idea is that we're not allowing it to empty because these muscles are doing their job really, really well. But then when we sit on the toilet and we're ready to empty our bladder, now we're essentially saying, okay, you have permission to empty now. And then our body just does the rest. We let go and we let it happen. So if you feel like you are having to make it happen, even if it's just to get the flow started, even if it's just to initiate that urine flow, then we have something going wrong and we need to address it. So if you are someone who feels like you can't possibly empty your bladder unless you make it happen or have to do something active to really get it started, there's a good chance that you might have a pelvic floor, a group of pelvic floor muscles that are tight or that are holding on too much and they don't know how to lengthen, they don't know how to relax down to baseline to allow urine to empty. That can be for a lot of different reasons. One of the reasons alone could simply be because for your entire life you've been pushing to pee. And when we push, we're dumping a lot of pressure down into this pelvic bowl, but the pelvic floor's job is to protect us against pressure so that it's protecting our pelvic organs. And so if we've been putting a bunch of unnecessary pressure down there for years and years or for our whole lives, whenever it started for you, then that pelvic floor could just be really in guard mode saying like, oh, dang, she's putting pressure down on me again. We really need to shorten and hang on tight so that we protect bladder and rectum and uterus, right? So that could be a piece of the puzzle where you just have a pelvic floor that has unlearned how to really rest down to baseline. So now you feel like you have to push to overcome that pressure of a pelvic floor that won't let go. If we continue down that road, though, what we see way later in life in women is something called pelvic organ prolapse, where because we've pushed and pushed and pushed to empty our bladder every single time, every single day for so long, now we've created a lot of laxity or weakness in the system. So those pelvic organs that should be nice and supported and suspended in the pelvis are starting to lose their support, and those organs aren't really suspended where they're supposed to be. So then they start to kind of dip down into areas that we don't want it, like into the vaginal canal. And that's what we call pelvic organ prolapse. So if you're someone who has needed to push to pee for a really long time, that can be a really good motivator to figure out why you're having to do that and to get that fixed so that you don't have to do it anymore. I also see for a lot of women, whether it's like chicken or the egg, we don't know which one came first, it can lead to some pain with intercourse, general pelvic pain or feeling of heaviness and pressure down there because their pelvic floor is getting all of that extra dump of pressure, but also maybe because those muscles are hanging on super tight. So when we see someone in pelvic floor PT who has all of these symptoms and then we get to the bottom of it and we're like, okay, tell me what you do. Like when it's time to pee, tell me what you do. And they say, well, I sit down and then I hold my breath and then I really push down so that I really push all of my urine out, right? Then we're like, oh, hold on. We've got to address that. That's a big piece of the puzzle here. So keep that in mind. The other way that I see women peeing incorrectly is that they got told, I think it's like our grandmother's generation. I think someone along the way made this up and then it like relayed down the line to us, is that you should really make sure you empty your bladder all the way, because if you don't empty your bladder all the way, then you increase your risk for infection, UTIs, whatever. I've heard people say like, well, my mom told me it was bad for my pelvic floor if I don't empty my bladder all the way. Somewhere along the line, this got messed up, right? First and foremost, we always hold a residual amount of urine in the bladder. That is normal and that is supposed to happen. It should be an amount that you don't notice. So it shouldn't be the kind where you feel like you tried to empty your bladder and you just feel like there's more left to empty and it won't come out. That's called urinary retention, and that's something that we can work on. But there's always going to be a small amount of urine left in the bladder, and that's okay. At the end of the day, though, even if you have something like urinary retention, we shouldn't have to push to get the last bit of urine out of the bladder. And so that's the other end of the spectrum where maybe they're like, well, I can sit down and initiate peeing just fine. I don't have to push to do that. But then just as a habit, they've started pushing at the end to make sure they got all of it out because somebody around along the way told them that if they don't, that they're harming their bladder health or their urethral health or their pelvic floor health, whatever it is. So if that's you, if that's something that you've been told along the way, please know that that is a myth. There's never a reason that we should have to push in order to empty our bladder, whether it's to initiate or whether it's at the end because we think we need to get the rest of it out. None of that is correct, and it can actually cause a lot of pelvic floor dysfunction and is a reason why pelvic floor therapists see patients quite often. Okay, so now the question is, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my God, I totally do that, what do I do about it? The question is, what do we do about it? So I have a few tips that you can try. The first one is to just practice deep breathing. Now that is a complicated tip because sometimes how you breathe in your body's natural breathing pattern is a big link of why you might not be able to relax your pelvic floor or find that lengthened position of your pelvic floor in order to empty your bladder, but you can still work on it on your own. I want you to find a comfortable position, whether it's laying down, sitting in a comfy spot, laying on your side, wherever it is, and you are going to practice taking nice, deep, full breaths with the goal of feeling that breath reach your pelvic bowl. So it's going to feel a feeling of that breath reaching all the way down. I like to tell patients to feel it reach between their sit bones because that's that big, deep pelvic floor area. So I want you to feel your breath reach between your sit bones and really feel those muscles lengthen, or almost think about those muscles accepting that breath. So if we're sitting and we're breathing into our pelvic bowl, we're going to feel that breath lengthen those tissues down and feel how your breath can really help to lengthen and relax tissues down to baseline or relax muscles down to baseline. And then after you've practiced that for a while and you feel like you're pretty successful at it, try it on the toilet. So instead of pushing to initiate that urine stream, I want you to take some nice deep full breaths and think about getting that breath to reach your pelvic floor and lengthen and allow the urine to come out. The other thing that you can do to help teach that pelvic floor to lengthen and relax down to baseline so that you don't feel like you have to push, I want you to think of it as in addition to breathing, but it's some good pelvic floor stretches. So when you're in a position that is technically a pelvic floor stretch or a pelvic floor lengthener, you're still using your breath and using that nice, deep, elongated breath to reach your pelvic floor muscles so that it makes that stretch really efficient and signals to the muscles what you're supposed to be doing in the stretch. But stretches like happy baby pose, child's pose breathing, a deep supported squat where maybe you have like a yoga block under your butt or you're hanging on to something in front of you and you can really get down into that squat position and feel that pelvic floor open, feel that pelvis open and feel that pelvic floor stretch and lengthen. And then we're using our breath again to reach the pelvic floor and lengthen the muscles. That can really be beneficial to teach you what it feels like to feel those muscles let go and lengthen. The other thing is a little bit more simple. It's simply noticing when you're clenching these muscles. So you'll start to notice like, oh my gosh, I really do hold those muscles in a shortened position all day long. So every time you notice it, just let it go. And at the beginning, it's going to feel frustrating because you're going to find that you always find those muscles in a shortened position. But the more that you practice, the more that you bring awareness to it and let it go and correct it when you notice it, the easier and the less frequent it is that you notice yourself holding in that position. Last but not least, if you are somebody who really cannot start a urine stream or feels like they just cannot empty their bladder without pushing to get it started or pushing to keep it emptying, and you try some of these things and it's not really carrying over, I really encourage you to find a pelvic floor PT that you can see so that they can assess your pelvic floor, assess the muscles around your urethra, assess what's going on here, and get to the bottom of why that is happening and help you make a plan to address the right thing for your body. Sometimes this is way more complicated than just getting someone breathing into their pelvic bowl or saying, well, just stop pushing, sit on the toilet and let it happen. Sometimes it is that easy, which is really nice, but a lot of times it's not, and a lot of times there's more underlying things that need to be addressed. So I just really want to encourage you, yes, of course, try these things at home, but also seek the help of a pelvic floor physical therapist that can help you really determine what's going on in your body so that you're addressing the right things. Again, if this was helpful and if you are interested in knowing when more content comes out about more pelvic health and women's health information, that is the kind of information that I think everybody deserves to know about their body, follow that link in the description so that you can sign up for Conquer Insiders. You can also subscribe here on YouTube if you're more of a YouTube person. Subscribe to the channel. We'll have new videos coming out every Monday, and you'll get notified when those videos come out. Thanks, y'all.